Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to the Provo City Council meeting. We're convened on Tuesday, Cinco de Mayo, at 5:30 p.m. in the Provo City Council chambers. The meeting is being broadcast live on Provo City Channel 17 and on channel 17.provo.org, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off electronic devices and by being respectful of those who are presenting this evening. We'll begin with a roll call, and we'll start with our Executive Director, Mr. Taylor.
Matt Taylor.
Brian Jones.
Al Miller.
Kay Van Buren.
Dave Sewell.
Gary Garrett.
I'm Santiago.
Callie Hales.
Gary Winterton.
John Curtis.
Mr. Ryan Freeman has agreed to help us this evening with our invocation and lead us in the pledge. And Ryan, we'll have you go ahead at this time.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ryan. I'll now look for a motion related to the minutes of our last council meeting, which was held April 21st. If everyone's had a chance to review those and submit their comments or edits, I'll look for a motion to approve those. Mr. Sewell, a motion to...
I move to approve.
Thank you. And a second by Mr. Van Buren. Thank you. Those in favor? Great, thank you. The voting is unanimous. We have a special presentation today in recognition of one of our city employees, and we'll turn the time over to our fire chief, Gary Jolly, for the presentation, and Nathan from the Employee Committee.
So each month, the Employees Association recognizes a different employee from each department for their contribution to the city. And the employee of the month for the month of May is Elena Olson from the fire department. So we would like to recognize her. We probably would recommend we do so quickly. I think we lost about 4 during the prayer for emergency as such with the fire department. So.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm Gary Jolly. I'm the fire chief, and I'd like to present Elena Olson to you as the Provo City Employee of the Month for the month of April. Come on up, Elena. We didn't realize how much we missed her until she went in for surgery about 2 weeks ago, and we just got her back today. And it's like blind leading the blind until we get somebody there to steer our ship for us. So that's how important she is to our department. But she's also been very important in other aspects citywide of helping build policies, review things for us, integrate with other departments. So what she does for us and what she does for me as the chief is huge. And so again, the ballot went out to our members, and this is how they felt about her, and so we really appreciate what she does for us. And so I think we've got a plaque that Nathan has for her that this says, congratulates Elena Olson for Employee of the Month for the April 2015. That's presented to you from the Employees Association. Another token of appreciation appreciation from the Employee Association. And then firefighter Brian Cottom has got a set of flowers, or an arrangement of flowers from the firefighters. And again, we really appreciate this. And thanks to the council for your support, and Mayor Curtis, and just our firefighters. We really appreciate that.
Congratulations, Elena. Would like to take a photo with you now.
Somebody's keys.
Congratulations again, Elena, and we do wish you well on your recovery and rehab. Thanks for the great service you provide to our city and firefighters. Where were those keys, Matt? Are they Ryan's? Ryan, did you leave your keys at the podium? There's a set of keys that was... Okay. We'll now begin the public comment portion of our meeting. This is an opportunity for any who are here to comment on matters that do not appear on tonight's agenda. Please speak into the microphone and begin by stating your name and city of residence. Should you not wish to speak, but instead to have your statement read aloud by the recorder, please provide her with a copy of that statement. Those who wish to speak should do so courteously and briefly. Be aware that the council and administration will not take any formal action on these matters this evening that arise during public comment, but we may respond informally as appropriate. Also, please be aware that of additional means for addressing the council and administration directly, including email, telephone, social media, all of which are included on Provo City's website. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium at this time.
Thank you, Chairman. I wish to thank you and the council for hearing us. I'm Gary Tate. I am from La Grande, Oregon. I represent Lions Clubs International. And Mayor Curtis, did you get your socks today? I didn't have any choice in picking them out. Good. But thank you. You have a wonderful city here. You're very caring and very friendly, and the reception to us has been great. What we're doing in your city today, these are some of my fellow Lions that are helping us here today, is we're starting a brand new charter Lions Club in your city. You don't have one, and we bring much in service activities, grants, and other things that help your schools. We have been working through your city, and we have signed up over 10 people already, and 20 is the starting of a club. We'd like to go more than that. 5 of them are educators, the business people. We're looking for the leaders. We would like to invite any of the council members or the mayor that would like to join this fine organization. It's a real easy organization to join. There's just a one-time $30 fee, and dues are about $80. That's how easy it is to join this. And the Provo Lions Club will represent Provo. Everything they do will emanate from them. It'll be a totally autonomous club, and we're here to I'm here to help start it. Fortunately, I have to go on North Dakota next week, but these Lions will stay here to help support it from the surrounding area. Is there any question about what Lions clubs do?
So you're the regional president then of the Lions Club?
Pardon?
You're from La Grande, Oregon. Are you the regional president?
No, what I am is just, I'm sent out here to assist in starting Lions Clubs. I started my first one back in '97, and I just assist and help and encouraging people to join and setting it up, and then I move on, and I'm just a representative from Lions Clubs International. These folks here are some of the local representatives that are from the surrounding areas that will help support this club. We don't really, you will elect your own officers. They will come from Provo. And what Provo Lions decide to do will be totally up to them. Their projects will be specific to Provo. It's an autonomous club. They'll elect their own officers, pick their own time, their own meeting places, and more importantly, they'll pick their own projects. Any money they raise here will stay in Provo. The only thing we ask is anything you take from the public, you give back to the public.
Well, we have great respect for the Lions Club organization. They've provided service to our city in the past. We have a Lions Park in our community, and look forward to seeing the Lions organization engaged in our community.
Well, thank you very much. It is a necessary need. One of the school principals that signed on said she had trouble getting vision help for her kids. That's one of our specialties. We love to help the children, and especially in vision. We have an eye bank here, a foundation here. We have volunteers that love to come in and help screen children. But there are many other things we do here and worldwide. We're the first ones in Nepal, for example.
That's great.
I have my card here if anyone would like it, or any other. I have a couple flyers is all. I already gave Hal over here a couple applications, so we'd like to have any of you. Would any of you like a card, some contact?
Please leave a few with the executive director if you could here. That would be great. Would love to.
Well, thank you very much. I probably overwent my time.
You're fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you in the city. Thank you. And thanks to the other visitors here today also. Is there any other public comment? If not, we'll move to the first item on our council agenda, which is related to the proposed budget for the next fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015, and a tentative resolution tentatively adopting this budget. And we'll turn the time over to our mayor for this presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And as I was anticipating what I might say to you, it occurred to me that by me presenting this, it may take away from those that have worked so hard on this. So, John, if I could have you kind of unprepared, just stand for a minute and introduce your team. I want to make sure they get the recognition they deserve for this budget.
Thank you, Mayor and Chair Garrett and the Honorable Council. This is a privilege and an honor for me to recognize our team. I'd like to have Denise Roy stand up. She's our budget officer, and this has been a tough budget for her because we had Sarah in our department who left to become the finance director over in Payson, Sarah Hubbs, and so it left Denise kind of short-handed, but we have Dustin Grabaugh. Will you stand up, Dustin, who just joined us, who used to be over with the energy department. He stepped in and done a fantastic job. We also have Dan Follett on our team that's been a contributor as well. But I want to really thank particularly Dustin and Denise for the great job they've done. They were here till 11 o'clock last night trying to work on some final touches to the budget. And it's a moving document. You'll recognize this as you start reviewing it, but it's something that requires a lot of work and effort, and so I just want to thank them for their time and what they've done.
Thank you, John. The council might remember that for the last 2 years we've received the Government Finance Officers Association Award, and that's targeted a lot at transparency and producing a budget that's easy for our residents to understand, and we'll be applying for that once again. because we feel like that's an important part of the budget. Well, the residents might find this a little unique that we're presenting a budget to you that you have not seen. And just to kind of set the stage a little bit, the administration works on a budget and presents it to the council. And as you heard, we were actually late last night, and up until you saw Denise and Dustin walk in just a minute late, up until then, putting this together for you before it's no longer ours and it moves over to you as the council. And the council gets a very short period of time to put their mark on this budget, and we look forward to assisting you any way we can in those upcoming weeks to help you get comfortable with the budget. I would like to point out a number of things that are in the budget, and I think that'll be helpful not only for you, and hopefully none of them are surprises to you, but to our residents as well. For our residents, the council has been working hard on a lot of policy issues related to the budget, and one of those is a desire to, where possible, to recoup the cost of our services. And in this budget, you'll see increased fee charges in an effort to do that in some of the parks and recreation area, and the golf course, the Covey Center fees, airport landing fees, passenger fees, and parking fees, library ballroom fees, and then perhaps the one that will have a very large impact on our residents is in our some of our utility fees. And Bryce, if you could throw that graph up. Last year, the council will remember, and likely our residents will remember, that we approved some rather healthy increases with some of our utilities. And this budget includes additional increases, another 9.4% in the wastewater fund, 9.8% in the water fund, and 5.8% in the stormwater fund. And as soon as we can see that whole graph, there we go. You can see the yellow line represents Provo and where we stand after us. If these rate increases are approved by the council, you can see we still stand very competitive with all of our neighbors, with 2 cities to the right and every other city to our left on that graph. And we feel like these are necessary to maintain our infrastructure and to keep pace with the increasing cost. We will want to spend a great deal of time with the council, and I think we're scheduling that to give you details on those increases. And your budget committee actually had the opportunity to hear those last week, and with us we'll be presenting those to you. In the budget, we have also included, as we have for the last several years, a merit increase for our employees who qualify of a 2.5% and a market adjustment. This is a very confusing study that we do. I say confusing because it has so many moving pieces, it's hard for our employees to understand. But in essence, it helps us keep pace with the market. And once a year, we go out into the marketplace and compare every single position in the city and then move those so that we stay competitive. It's our goal to pay a good wage to our employees, not too much and not too little. And that requires once a year going out and checking the market, and that's included in here, as well as some adjustments to our career series advancements, health insurance increases, and I might just give Human Resources a shout out on this. We've as much of the country has, we've experienced large increases in health insurance for a number of years. We made some pretty dramatic changes to the policy a year or two ago, which was very well received by our employees because it gave them more choices. It also has helped us curb that increasing cost. And this year we had a 5.4% increase, which is close to half of what we'd had for the years before, and we attribute that to the changes that Human Resources has made in the policies. We also get increased costs from the Utah retirement system. We have a 401k match for our employees of 2%, and we've maintained an employee recognition appreciation program that we've had. Along with your desires that, particularly in the recreation department, we make sure that we're setting aside enough money to maintain that facility. We have completed an analysis of not only all the exercise equipment, but all the equipment in the building, including the roof, heaters, coolers, chillers, and everything in that, and put that on a spreadsheet with its useful life. prorated that and set aside that portion of the budget into an account that will pay for the maintenance of that building, and that's all accounted for and in our budget to be able to maintain that building, every aspect of that building. We have also enhanced the funding into our fleet, our automobiles. A number of years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, as the economy turned and we had to cut money out of our budget, there were cuts made to our automobile reserve, and that has that had a good short-term effect and a bad long-term effect, and this budget restores that and takes a step back to restoring that budget to good health. For a number of years, we've worked on our fleet facility and trying to find a way to fund our fleet facility. It's been on the list every year, and in the tough budgets we've had in the past, we have been unable to fund that fleet facility. This budget does find a way to fund that fleet facility, and the Public Works has found a way to break that into 2 phases, so this actually funds the first phase of it. And for our residents, I think the council members have seen this, but our fleet facility is old, which would be problematic, but worse, it's unsafe. A number of the automobiles that they service can no longer even fit into the building, which puts them outside servicing these automobiles, and something that's been desperately needed. And that's funded in this budget as well. As is a system, what we call citywide municipal software system, Provo 360. The city has worked for years on a cobbled together network of programs that have been purchased or built in-house one at a time. And in some cases, these programs that were designed by internal people, those people who designed and built them, are no longer with us. And the software language that they wrote in is no longer practiced. And those are the programs running our city in some places. And many of these programs don't talk to each other, which means it's very difficult to control data. We use the example, if we wanted to know how much it costs to fill a pothole, we have to go to a number of databases, and that becomes a several-hour exercise instead of a several-second exercise that we would like. That software is also included in this year's budget. Every year, we ask our directors, well, I should say for the last 5 years, we've asked our directors to submit a budget that either was lower than the year before or in the best case was flat with the year before. And we've done that because of the tough budget years that we've had. This year was no exception. We asked them to submit a flat budget, and then we have them submit to us on top of that the things that they feel like they need that are increased expenses over what they had the year before. We've done that every year for 5 years, and that list is usually about $5 million big. And every year before this, we've picked just a couple of those items off that we've been able to fill, but we've had to say no to all the other requests. This year, the request from our city was $5,739,000 over what they spent last year. And due to some really great work, and this is where the budget team comes in, of figuring out what we can do without. We did get some increased revenue and sales tax. We were able to actually fund about half of that list, which is about $2.6 million. And you can imagine a budget the size of this budget, how quickly it is to absorb that $2.6 million, but also how needed it was for these departments who for 5, 6, 7, 8 years have only been experiencing cuts. So we're very pleased about that. Part of that includes 3 additional police officers, something that we've worked with the council and even before my time for many years to increase the number of police officers we have in our city. We did an external audit several years ago, and it pointed out that we were about 10 officers short. This budget funds 3 of those. 2 we have found through the efficiencies of saving or moving money into different places. And 1 we would like to fund by suggesting a property tax increase to our residents. Nobody likes a property tax increase. I think that's actually the most dreaded tax. What we're proposing is that we ask our residents to simply let us stay flush for this year only with inflation. And I say it that way because we have not done that for decades where we have moved with inflation. So in reality, our budget gets further and further behind in spending dollars. by allowing us to make that jump just on 1 year's inflation level, we can actually fund a police officer. So that's our suggestion. Also in the budget is an assumption that we move forward with the RAP tax. And I want to be very clear with our residents that this is ultimately a council decision, not an administrative decision. But we have included projections for a RAP tax in there. And I'll have Councilman Winterton pass out to you 3 documents here. The first document is a unanimous resolution of the Parks and Recreation Board asking us to move forward with the RAP tax. And the second 2 documents are 2 possible ways that they would suggest we look at funding the way that we would spend the money that the RAP tax would fund. It's a very impressive list. As you look at that, I know it's a little bit hard to read because of its size, and we can give it to you electronically. But the number of projects that they can tackle with the RAP tax is really very amazing. For those who are listening and who are not familiar with the RAP tax, we call it a Recreation, Arts, and Park tax. It can be called several things. In Orem, they call it a care tax. In Salt Lake, they call it a ZAP tax because they include zoos. And in essence, it's a 1/10 of a cent of sales tax added to a purchase. So if you were to, for every dollar we spent, we would collect a 1/10 of a cent in sales tax revenue. Many of our residents are not aware that they're already paying this. And when I tell them that, they look at me strangely, and that's because if you shop in Orem or American Fork, you're actually paying, or up in the Salt Lake, you're paying this 1/10 of a cent. As a result, many of us are paying for Orem's parks, and those people outside of Provo who shop in Provo are not making a like contribution to us. So it's our suggestion that we move forward with that. Also included in the budget is an estimate, our best estimate, for the cost associated with the City Center Temple Open House. I want to be clear that we could incur costs that are not foreseen if that is held in January and we don't have an exact date and we have a record amounts of snow and need to shovel walks and clear ice and snow. That's not included, but to our best knowledge, we've funded for that. We have also funded for something I'm very pleased about. It's called an automated parking ticket system. It has the ability to read license plate numbers and help us with our parking. Our desire is not to issue more tickets, but our desire is to be far more effective in enforcement in controlling areas like downtown to make sure that we have parking available for our residents coming downtown. We're also getting continued pressure in our neighborhoods for parking, and this will help us be far more effective in having a good parking situation in our city. And there's more. We have funded for Parks and Rec and Energy the ability to continue with the tree planting program. We have tasked them over the last few years to replace trees without a budget. And that went out of the budget a number of years ago when we were having our tough budgets, and we've reinstated that. There's also some need for a upgraded telephone system and dispatch, and that is funded, as well as an emergency alert system. 2 weeks ago today, many of our residents are not familiar, and perhaps some tonight, that we actually had a potential emergency in this building, and we learned a lot of lessons. And one of those lessons was how difficult it was to communicate with 600 employees at once. This system not only will let us notify our residents of an emergency, but selected groups like city employees, and that is funded in our budget as well. Finally, you won't be surprised to know that we have to fund for a municipal election, that we're responsible this year for the cost of that election. What might surprise residents is that election costs us about $94,000. And so it's important that we fund for that. In real rough terms, half of that was funded for in last year's budget, and half has been funded in this year's budget. So in short, there is a lot in that budget. I don't envy you in the next few weeks, the short period of time that you have to absorb this. But we're looking forward to jumping in and answering all your questions and receiving the budget back from you as you see fit in several weeks. Are there any questions?
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned that it would go to the council as far as RAP tax goes. I understand that will actually ultimately go to a ballot, and I think that one of the things that's important to recognize is the success that even the challenges that Orem City, for example, had, and the overwhelming success of that vote for that tax.
Thank you. That's an important clarification. The council decides if it goes on the ballot, but you're exactly right. The residents then decide if we pass that measure. So it would be something that the residents would weigh in on.
Thank you, Mayor. And we know we have two retreats, council retreats scheduled for next week on Tuesday, 1 week from today, and then a week from Thursday, to spend hours poring over these pages and others and asking other questions and working with you on that. What other questions do you have for the mayor tonight? Ms. Santiago?
Assuming that the council would like the council budget committee to look over this proposed budget, I would just ask Mr. Mayor if it would be okay with you to have John Borgett and Denise Roy, or whoever you think would be helpful, to attend some of those meetings with our budget committee to be able to give feedback on some of these items.
Yes, that's a good point. Thank you. We would love to do that. I believe they met with them and you last week on some of the issues in here, and we think it's very important that they understand and feel comfortable with everything in here as well.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no other questions for the mayor, I'll look for a motion to tentatively adopt this proposed budget. Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move for the approval of the resolution tentatively adopting a proposed budget for Provo City Corporation for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015 and ending June 30th, 2016.
Thank you. Is there a second? Ms. Santiago? Thank you. Those in favor? That vote is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you again, Mayor. Next, we'll turn to a resolution consenting to the appointment of individuals to various boards and commissions here in the city. And we'll look to our Chief Administrative Officer, Wayne Parker, for this presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the opportunity. As you are aware, for almost all of our boards and commissions, their terms run from July 1 to June 30, and so these are the first of a couple of dozen that you'll be seeing over the next few council meetings. And so this evening we are presenting three names for your advice and consent to the mayor's appointment. For Christine Manwaring to serve as a member of the Civil Service Commission, and then for Dr. Fidel Montero and Mary Rasband to serve as members of the Energy Board. It should be noted that Mary will be replacing Doug Smoot, who I think served on the Energy Board since we bought the energy system 60 years ago from Utah Power, 75 years ago from Utah Power. But nonetheless, that's quite an accomplishment, and we recognized him at a dinner a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about these appointments, and recommend that you approve the resolution giving advice and consent.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Big shoes to fill in Mr. Smoot.
Indeed.
Questions for Mr. Parker? If not, I'll call for a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Winterton?
Make a motion that we accept the appointments, a resolution to accept the appointments of the individuals to these boards.
Thank you, Mr. Winterton. Is there a second? Mr. Sewell, thank you. Those in favor? Thank you, and that vote is unanimous. We turn next to a resolution authorizing the mayor to submit an application for a Utah County Municipal Recreation Grant to be used for the Lions Park North Stairway and South Parking Lot Landscape Enhancements. Looks like our Lions Club contingent left too early. And we'll turn to Doug Robbins, our Park Division Director, for this presentation.
Thank you. Today is my opportunity to present our proposal for this year's Utah County Municipal Grant. It's an annual grant that's funded by the restaurant tax here in Utah County, and this year's appropriation that's given to Provo is $63,828.90. Again, this is a reimbursement grant, so funds would be reimbursed by the county following completion of these projects. And what we'd like to do is two elements at Lions Park. The first is to replace the stairwell that was damaged due to some floods, and also to restore some landscaping on the south corner. Those of you that have been around Provo for a while recognize this old staircase. It's over 50 years old. It was kind of on its last leg of serviceability. The hillside was kind of reclaiming this stairwell, and it was in a corner of the park that we'd received several complaints about visibility problems and safety. In 2013, floodwaters cascaded over Grandview Hill and undermined the soils underneath this stairwell. And it's every once in a while, nature will do you a favor and actually take out an element like this that was nearing the end of its serviceability again. So what we'd like to do is relocate this stairwell in a site that's a little bit more visible, as this slide shows. Some of the soils that were placed in that corner aren't conducive to construction activity, and so we've been advised that this would be a better location. There are several benefits to this location, somewhere inside this red box. It would be a little shorter, a little less costly to build, improved visibility, and also closer to utilities where we'd be able to run lighting to the staircase as well. We would include a transition platform at the top of this stairwell, so that people using the stairwell could transition from the sidewalk and safely transition down to the park. The other element of this project would be landscaping around the new well site on the southeast corner of Lions Park, where a new well has recently been located. We've been partnering with the Public Works Department that's offered to construct an asphalt parking lot with curb and sidewalk, and we'd like to go around the perimeter of that site and tie in the remaining area of that well site and new parking lot with the remaining park. This will also include some irrigated shrub borders, trees, and landscaped islands that previously didn't exist at this site. So we feel that will tie up this project and tie it into the park and add some much needed parking for the programming that we schedule at this park. All in all, we plan to be completed with these two projects by the end of October, and we'd sure appreciate your support with this very important grant opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Questions? Mr. Van Buren?
More a comment than a question. I know in our work meeting I questioned a little bit the location, and since I had conversation with Brent Hall, who's the neighborhood chair, and Aaron Scablin, who's the vice chair down there, who's had a lot of interest in Lions Park and a lot of improvements. And they were grateful that you've reached out, and he says we've been involved with them and we're okay at that location. We think it'll be fine. So I just want to report back that there was a positive report back, and those people that have had a real interest are encouraged with the stairs and where they are. So thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I'll look for a motion for council discussion. Ms. Santiago?
I was just going to make a motion unless somebody else wanted to discuss. I move that we approve the resolution as written.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. Is there a second? Mr. Van Buren, thank you. Those in favor? Thank you. That vote was unanimous. Thanks again, Mr. Robbins. We'll now have a public hearing on a resolution appropriating $612,000 in the Sanitation Operating Fund for expenses relating to the creation of an in-house recycling program and applying to the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015. This will be presented by Public Services Division Director Greg Beckstrom.
Good evening. I think you're familiar with this resolution. This is consistent with the discussions that we've been having regarding the insourcing of the collection of the recycling blue can program in the city. And this is proposed to start as part of the new budget year. It will take place sometime later this summer, but there is a lead time associated with acquiring this number of cans. And so this is an appropriation out of fund balance to purchase the actual cans that will be used. And then as that transition takes place, these new cans will replace the existing cans that are provided by the vendor that is currently handling that collection program. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Beckstrom. Questions? Mr. Miller?
I have a question, Mr. Beckstrom, that I neglected to ask Mr. Decker in today's work meeting. How will we know when we should go back to outsourcing our recycling program?
That is something that will probably be a continual question that we will be asked to respond to periodically over the course of time. And I think the answer to that question is the primary motivating factors for making this decision were a matter of cost and a level of customer service. And if we get to a point where we conclude as a city that it is advantageous from both a cost and a customer service standpoint to outsource this instead of continuing to do it in-house, that would be the point in time at which that decision would be made.
Would this be as often as an annual analysis?
I would not expect it to incur annually, but it's something that will probably come up every few years.
Thank you.
Also regarding some discussion that was held earlier in our work meeting, there was some discussion about the replacement of the cans and some timing issues. And I remember, Mr. Parker, I think the letter was addressed to you, and I just want to know how that plays into adopting or not adopting this resolution.
Well, the adoption of the resolution will allow us to purchase cans, which we need to do regardless of whether we purchase them from the existing vendor or whether we buy them on the open market. We have an RFP out currently. We'll open those bids and take a look and see what's our most advantageous cost factor. There are a couple of elements which might suggest that if the cost differential is not huge, even if it's more expensive to buy new cans, that we might want to. A couple of those things include, number one, the cans would have Provo City's name and logo on them rather than Republic Services name and logo, which could conceivably be confusing to our residents. In addition to that, the cans that are currently in Republic's inventory in Provo are out of warranty, and there's some value to having new warranted cans to where the manufacturer will cover any defects or problems that occur with those during their life. And so again, we'll very carefully evaluate those, and we'll let you know. But our thinking is if the cost differential is relatively small, it might be better to acquire new cans and kind of start fresh. In terms of extending the term of the agreement, I think, again, our intent is to let's take a look at delivery date on the cans. In addition to that, it's not easy to go pick up 11,000 cans and replace them. That will take some time. So again, we'll go through that evaluation period, and if it is advantageous to us to extend the life of our existing contract while we transition, we'll be happy to do that. We don't have any preconceived notions about doing, trying to move too quickly or otherwise. So again, we'll take a look at that as we get into the implementation process. So under any scenario, we've got to buy the cans. It is money that's in the sanitation fund, so money that we don't spend out of that appropriation just stays in the fund. So it's again, it's not going anywhere else if the money isn't spent on the can acquisition.
Mr. Beckstrom, what discussions have you had relative to the possibility of moving from a biweekly recycling pickup to a weekly recycling pickup as our current other garbage?
The recommendation and the way it's presented in the proposed budget is that at the time the change out is made from to in-source the collection program, that it would at the same time transition to a weekly collection program. We've evaluated that as part of the evaluation process we've gone through over the last year. We've received a lot of feedback from the community in favor of the weekly collection. Part of it is just plain a confusion factor. I mean, it's hard to always remember which week your recycle can is available, and part of it is as people are transitioning to the recyclables, they're finding that every other week many of our customers is not of sufficient frequency to service their demand, and they end up having to put recyclables into their black can for collection. And I think the final factor is that it was determined that we could actually provide that transition of insourcing the collection program and go to a weekly program as opposed to a biweekly program for roughly a 20% increase in cost to the customer. So for a 20% increase in cost, they're getting double the service. And so those are the factors that went into making that recommendation.
Great, thank you. Mr. Winterton?
With the program, is it still an opt-in or opt-out, or would that then become mandatory?
No, the program is opt-out, and that would not change.
And that would not change.
Other questions?
Mr. Beckstrom, I wonder if you consider adding to the list of desirable outcomes of purchasing new cans or carts the fact that the new model would come with that embedded device for monitoring the can.
That is true. I think the reason that wasn't mentioned earlier as an advantage is the vendor of the current cans has indicated that they could be installed in the existing cans. So that is an option under either scenario. And whichever scenario we go with, we would look at doing.
Thank you.
I believe it was mentioned in the work session that the readers are not, the technology isn't quite where you'd want it to be. Is that fair? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and that's primarily because to fully move there is additional technology that's going to have to be installed in the trucks and the collection trucks, and then there's also some software costs that would have to be incorporated into our customer service programming as well. And so when this enables us to have a full set of cans, at least in the recycling program, we would look at eventually transitioning to that in our black can program as well. But this definitely is the most cost-effective way to get it into the blue cans, enables us to be ready when those transitions are made in the technology in the trucks and in the software in our customer service programs.
Have you checked with other cities who are doing the recycling or who have the reader placed on their garbage cans and to see their satisfaction with the product?
The communities that are doing it, and it's a technology like a lot of technologies that is kind of moving into the sanitation business across the country, and the front end costs have been such that for the most part there are certain economies of scale that are required to make it cost effective at this point in time. Like all technology, those costs will probably come down over time, but in those areas where it's done, it is found to be a very effective management tool as well as a customer service tool.
Okay. And the extra cost to have those embedded in the can is what per can? Do you know what that extra cost is?
I think it's about $1 per can when you buy them front end. Yeah, so it's less than $1 per can when you buy them as part of a new can.
Okay, and if you were to come back later and put that on a can, it would be
several times that.
Several times that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It seems to me as I compare moving in-house with our current contract service, we've been told there may be a fairly slight difference in customer service, although that's kind of been difficult to document, a small cost advantage, but we're comparing a known cost with the contract provider against sort of an estimated cost. So that might be a little fuzzy there. I'm wondering if you've considered maybe moving to a little bit different model in the way that we do our pricing and our incentives, because right now we there's sort of an incentive, financial incentive not to recycle. I mean, it's relatively small, and I know going weekly will be very popular, but adding that extra dollar may cause some people to say, well, maybe I don't need that can. And we were just looking at the way that Salt Lake does it today, and it was a very interesting model because they charge just a little bit more for the black garbage can, but then essentially their version of the green and the blue ones are included in the price. And I'm just wondering if we're considering a switch of this magnitude, is this a good time to maybe consider that? And
we looked at that, and we made the decision not to just try and do too much at one time, in part for purposes of simplicity. We wanted to make this transition fairly clear in terms of what the costs and the trade-offs and the differences were. If we melded in a whole new program, it would have been very difficult to separate the nuances of the changes in the model and the incentives for just charging the collection versus what were the differences in the costs versus continuing with the private vendor versus insourcing the collection system. So that was what was the reason that we did not decide to do that at the same time. Having said that, we definitely recognize that's something we need to look at, and I would expect over the course of the next year, we will probably come back to you to discuss some of those options and some of those alternatives. And it's being done a number of different ways in different communities. The Salt Lake model has some things that seem very enticing from a cost incentive standpoint, but one of the elements of their program is it's basically 100% mandatory. And so what we'd like to do is come back and discuss and share with you some of these other models, describe the differences and describe the trade-offs, and have that discussion as to whether or not we want to make some changes as we move forward. There are a number of things that are changing in the economics in the sanitation business, and the financial benefits and incentives in both the recycling and the composting programs are not what they were a decade ago. And we need to consider that, and I think have that discussion with you regarding those various options and alternatives. But we felt that it would have been difficult to do a fair evaluation and a clear evaluation of the trade-offs between continuing with the private collection versus insourcing it if we tried to do that all at one time.
Okay. Another question. It seems to me that we've had by all accounts, a very reliable partner for the last 4 years that's done a good job. And I'm not sure what the factors are in your timetable. If we were to consider or suggest to you considering extending the contract to the end of the year, as sort of a gesture of appreciation and respect, and maybe give you some more time to get everything in place. I'm just wondering if that would be a possibility.
I think we're certainly open and want to consider potentially extending that and evaluating the trade-offs. There are a number of elements that we would probably have some concerns of extending it all the way to the end of the year, because making that transition in winter weather conditions creates some problematic issues. That's not probably a good time to do that, either from the vendor standpoint, from our city standpoint, or the customer standpoint. So we would probably we would have some concerns about extending it all the way to the end of the year, but extending it a couple of months into the fall is something that I think certainly warrants looking at. And and part of the factor again into that is the work that customer service needs to do in terms of transitioning the billing and the notification, and we want to avoid and we need to understand where the pressure points are in their schedule relative to things like the start of the school year and things of that nature that we would like to factor into making that decision. But as Mr. Parker indicated, the August 1st deadline is not something that's hard and fast in our mind, and we're certainly open to evaluating that, considering that.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, thank you, Mr. Beckstrom. This item has been noticed as a public hearing, And so we'd like to invite any members of the public who have come to speak to this item or who would wish to address this item to approach the podium at this time.
Hi, Mr. Chair, Council, Mayor. My name is Alyssa Daly. I'm here from Republic Services, and I just wanted to reiterate what we talked about in the work session today, which we very much appreciate your willingness and the staff's willingness to let us come and participate in that with you today. So we very much enjoyed our relationship with Provo City, and we appreciate you, and we appreciate what's been said here tonight about the possibility of extending the contract for a few months and working with Mr. Parker and his staff on that decision. And as far as the carts go, we're more than willing to be open about the opportunity of sending our carts over. I wanted to share a little piece of information for you guys that will be helpful for the staff and for the council as far as deciding which way to go with the cart purchases. So we record all of the swap outs and fixed wheels and lids and all of those things. And in the last 12 months, we've replaced 100 carts in Provo City. And so that's good information for you to know. So, and the contract's 4 years old, and we started with all new containers. So they're in really decent shape. I just bought a house in American Fork. My company actually services it, and I have a really old container, and it is doing great. So the lifespan on those is very long. I do understand the concern with warranty, and that is definitely something to think about and very smart to consider. But I did want to let you know that we've only replaced 100 in the last year, so those containers are still relatively new, and we're very open to the possibility of working something out with you guys as far as that cart purchase goes. And if you want the microchips, and then we've talked about that, we can do that. It's about $5 a container, but if you purchase the carts from us, they're at a depreciated value. And even if we put the chips in them, it's about $127,000 savings to the city. So just wanted to let you guys know that, and that we appreciate you so very much, and we appreciate working with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. Any other public comment? If not, we'll close public comment and bring the item back to the council for discussion or for a motion.
Just a question then for me, that this is only for the purchase of cans at this point. We still are going to be deciding later on as far as what is the frequency of pickup and our involvement in the process. It will come back to us later.
Mr. Parker?
Yeah, actually the council's action will be to amend the consolidated fee schedule when you adopt the budget that will set the new rate for weekly versus biweekly. And so again, I think you still have one bite at the apple, certainly, before a final decision were to be made. But that would be our intent, would be to go ahead and get the cans ordered and begin the process of moving toward the bringing of it in-house. Whether it's weekly or biweekly, I think remains the ball remains in your court.
And getting the cans ordered, we'd maybe order them from Republic, or we would order them from new.
We're not quite sure. We'll evaluate that when we see our proposals, which I think are due, Bryce, end of this week or next week. Okay. Yeah, they'll be in on Thursday, and so we'll have some time to evaluate those and compare the two offers and make some decisions at that point. So again, we'll do that in light of full slate of information.
I know our city has enjoyed great services and attention from our current provider, Public Services, and there's certainly some motivation here, financial motivation, to make a change like this. But from my part, the service has been exceptional from Republic, and we compliment them for their work with us over the last 4 years. Mr. Sewell?
Just one more comment. I don't think this affects the resolution before us, but it seems like there's good reasons for moving ahead with this. The only aspect of this that I feel like we're moving in the wrong direction just a little bit is raising the rate on the recycling. I'd like to see us kind of move in the other direction.
Again, I think, the consolidated fee schedule is yours to adopt as a part of the budget. The administration's recommendation is what you've heard tonight, but if we want to engage in other discussion, or if you want to bring the budget committee or a focus group or something together to talk about alternative rate structures, we're certainly wide open to that.
I might add, I think the dialogue about the dollar has been good because it's a transparent way for our residents to see what changing that service does. Whether or not the council decides that's the best way to pay for it. I do think it's a good dialogue that people kind of associate that dollar with the weekly pickup.
Other discussion? Or a motion? Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move for approval of a resolution appropriating $612,000 in the Sanitation Operating Fund for expenses relating to the creation of an in-house recycling program and applying to the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Winterton, thank you. Those in favor? Thank you. That vote is unanimous. We will now recess as the Municipal Council and reconvene as the Stormwater Special Service District for this next item. So I will call for a motion to recess as the council and reconvene as the district, service district.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. And a second by Ms. Hales. Thank you. Those in favor? Thank you. That vote is unanimous. Convened as the Stormwater Special Service District, we now consider a resolution tentatively adopting a proposed budget for the Provo City Stormwater Special Service District for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015. This will be presented by our budget officer and controller, Denise Roy.
Good evening. This isn't quite as exciting as the other stuff. We do adopt it separately, and so you've been provided with 2 pages. It's the Storm Drain Operating Fund and also the Capital Improvement Fund. So they're just 2 pages, and the proposed budget book is out on the website, provo.org, under the Finance Division, under Financial Reports. And this is page 166 and 167. But you should have a copy with that packet that was passed around earlier.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. Questions? If there are no questions, I'll look for a motion.
Mr. Garrett, I do have one question now I think about it. Why do we do this as the RDA, maybe that rather than in a city council?
This is
the stormwater, as the stormwater. Why can that not be part of the regular budget, or was that
great question?
It is. The Special Service District actually is a separate legal entity, and it was established when the stormwater fee was initially done, and that was the way the statute provided for it at the time. And so we created a special service district with the municipal council members as the board. So you really only have this meeting generally twice a year, once when you receive the budget and once when you adopt it. If there were ever a time when we would bond against that revenue stream, the special service district would have to issue the bonds. So it's the mechanism that was in place when we broke new ground on this concept of a stormwater user fee 25 years ago. And so that's it's just the legal mechanism that was allowed at the time by the legislature to do that.
Is it common in other cities?
Yes. Yeah, it's very common. I don't know anymore if you adopted one, if you'd have to be in a service district or not. I think a city could simply do that. But at the time, that was the legal mechanism that was allowed by the statute.
Mr. Miller leaned over and asked if I had anything else to say, and I just said what you didn't realize when you were elected is that you actually won 4 or 5 elections at the same time because you were elected to all of these different legal entities separately at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Jones and Mr. Parker.
With no pay increase.
Yeah. Same minimum wage. Any other questions?
If you were only so lucky to make minimum wage.
Or a motion? Mr. Sewell?
I move to approve a resolution tentatively adopting a proposed budget for the Provo City Stormwater Special Service District for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015 and ending June 30th, 2015.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Is there a second? Mr. Van Buren? Any discussion? June 30, 2016.
Should be
Thank you.
2016,
Thank you.
yeah. This should be what the resolution says.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any other discussion? If not, I'll call for a vote. Those in favor? And that vote is unanimous.
I call for a motion to adjourn the Stormwater Special Service District of Provo meeting and reconvene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo meeting.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Sewell.
Is there a second? All in favor?
A second by Mr. Miller.
Thank you.
We will now recess as the Municipal Council and reconvene as the Stormwater Special Service District for this next item. So I will call for a motion to recess as the council and reconvene as the district, service district.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. And a second by Ms. Hales. Thank you. Those in favor? Thank you. That vote is unanimous. Convened as the Stormwater Special Service District, we now consider a resolution tentatively adopting a proposed budget for the Provo City Stormwater Special Service District for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015. This will be presented by our budget officer and controller, Denise Roy.
Good evening. This isn't quite as exciting as the other stuff. We do adopt it separately, and so you've been provided with 2 pages. It's the Storm Drain Operating Fund and also the Capital Improvement Fund. So they're just 2 pages, and the proposed budget book is out on the website, provo.org, under the Finance Division under Financial Reports. And this is page 166 and 167, but you should have a copy with that packet that was passed around earlier.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. Questions? If there are no questions, I'll look for a motion.
Mr. Garrett, I do have one question now I think about it. Why do we do this as the RDA, maybe that rather than in a city council?
This is
The stormwater,
okay.
As the stormwater, why can that not be part of the regular budget, or was that
Great question.
statutorily?
It is, the Special Service District actually is a separate legal entity, and it was established when the stormwater fee was initially done, and that was the way the statute provided for it at the time. And so we created a Special Service District with the municipal council members as the board. So you really only have this meeting generally twice a year, once when you receive the budget, once when you adopt it. If there were ever a time when we would bond against that revenue stream, the Special Service District would have to issue the bonds. So it's the mechanism that was in place when we broke new ground on this concept of a stormwater user fee 25 25 years ago. And so it's just the legal mechanism that was allowed at the time by the legislature to do that.
Is it common in other cities?
Yes. Yeah, it's very common. I don't know anymore if you adopted one, if you'd have to be in a service district or not. I think a city could simply do that, but at the time, that was the legal mechanism that was allowed by the statute.
Mr. Miller leaned over and asked if I had anything else to say, and I just said what you didn't realize when you were elected is that you actually won 4 or 5 elections at the same time because you were elected to all of these different legal entities separately at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Jones and Mr. Parker.
With no pay increase.
Yeah. Same minimum wage. Any other questions?
If you were only so lucky to make minimum wage.
Or a motion? Mr. Sewell?
I move to approve a resolution tentatively adopting a proposed budget for the Provo City Stormwater Special Service District for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015 and ending June 30th, 2015.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Is there a second? Mr. Van Buren? Any discussion? June 30, 2016.
Should be
Thank you.
2016.
Thank you.
Yeah, this should be what the resolution says.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any other discussion? If not, I'll call for a vote. Those in favor? And that vote is unanimous.
I call for a motion to adjourn the Stormwater Special Service District of Provo meeting and reconvene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo meeting.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Sewell.
Is there a second? All in favor?
A second by Mr. Miller.
Thank you. I think actually you should conduct it now. That's all right. Okay, so we'll move on to discussion of a resolution tentatively adopting a proposed budget for the Redevelopment Agency, and this will be again presented by Denise Roy.
So this is also in your packet. There's a one-page summary, and that will start on page 169 in the budget book if you go out online. And so this is just a summary. When you get into the book, there's additional pages behind because we have numerous funds. We have the Community Development Block Grant. We have the Home Consortium, Special Purpose Grants, Tax Increment, and Redevelopment. So this is just a summary of all those budgets for this one page, but you can find all the detail back though, and if you need anything else, you can contact myself too, and I can give you that information too.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion among council members? We'll call for a motion then.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution tentatively adopting a proposed budget for the Redevelopment Agency of Provo City Corporation for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015 and ending June 30th, 2016.
Is there a second? Mr. Miller. All in favor? The motion passes unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 8, a resolution approving the second amendment to the real estate purchase agreement between the Redevelopment Agency and Liberty Center Associates, presented by David Walter.
Mr. Chairman, agency board members, good evening. The item before you is a resolution asking you to extend the closing time for Cowboy Partners to move on their Liberty Center project. There have been a couple of discussions with Mr. Lofgren of Cowboy Partners about the public parking that's going in there. He put it in at our behest. There was a time when we thought we might ask him to take it out, so he went through and revamped it, and subsequently we just need to extend the time to allow him to close. He has received all of his other financing and is prepared to move by the end of this month. That's pretty much the gist of the amendment. It's just to give him more time to close, and nothing else is changing in terms of the deal. So I'm available for any comments or questions.
Are there any questions? Thank you. Is there a member from the Liberty Center team here that wishes to address us concerning this amendment? If not, then we'll take the item back to the council for discussion. If there are no questions or comments, then I'll call for a motion.
What is the, I'm curious, Mr. Parker, what is the actual amount of time that this has been extended beyond the original?
It was extended once before. The original terms of the agreement contemplated, I think, about a year or about a year's time to allow them to get through their due diligence, their financing, and so on. This again is a project that has some low-income tax credits associated with it. I know those. I sit on the board at the state, which takes some pieces of those that are not covered by the Utah Housing Corporation, and that agency extended their closing date also until the end of May. And so again, I think all the pieces are now in place to ensure that we actually get a project. So this is the second time we've extended the deadline, and this time it was again just extended a couple of months in order to just complete the final due diligence.
The original deadline was?
The original deadline, I think, was about this time last year. I think it was spring of last year, and then we extended it a year, and then we now just need to extend that from the end of March to the end of May to allow them to close within the time of the agreement.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I'll call for a motion then.
I move that we approve the resolution approving a second amendment to the real estate purchase agreement between the Redevelopment Agency and Liberty Center Associates, LLC.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. Is there a second? Ms. Hales, thank you. All in favor? The motion carries unanimously. I call for a motion to adjourn the Redevelopment Agency of Provo meeting and reconvene as the Municipal Council of Provo meeting. Mr. Garrett, thank you. Is there a second? Ms. Hales, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. We'll turn to the final item then on our council agenda for tonight, which is an ordinance amending sections 14.21A, .070, and 14.21B, .070 of the Provo City Code to delete the maximum number of building stories allowed to include a minimum first-story height requirement in the downtown 1 district and the downtown 2 district zone. This has citywide impact. And we will turn to Mr. Josh Yost, one of our city planners, for the presentation.
Thank you. I hope my time in front of you today is slightly less exciting than the last time. But this action has been brought to us under an application from Forge Development, a development company that's currently engaged in the construction of the 63 East apartment and commercial building located at 63 East Center, and they are working towards an application for a second development within that block. They have requested, as has been noted, a deletion of the maximum number of, or maximum story height in the DT1 zone, removing that current restriction of 6 stories and relying solely on the 100-foot maximum building height currently codified in the zone. Staff, upon analysis of the application, decided to include the DT2 zone, or the Downtown Central District zone, within this application as well, to make a similar deletion of the maximum story height limit in that zone and rely on the 200-foot height limit requirement, or height limit restriction. Additionally, we've proposed to include a 14-foot minimum first-story height for commercial properties or commercial first floor within both of those zones, and also to institute a 10-foot minimum first floor height for residential product within those two zones. For your reference, the Downtown 1 and Downtown 2 zones currently require commercial first floors on Center Street from 500 West to 100 East, and on University north of Center Street, and it requires the remaining frontages on University and Center Street within the DT1 and DT2 zones to be built to a commercial standard, even if they are initially occupied as residential. That would be east of 100 East, west of 500 West, and then south of Center on University. So those are the areas in which a commercial first floor requirement is, a commercial first floor is required, and that 14-foot minimum would be required regardless of the proposed initial occupancy of the space. But the proposed ordinance would have overall effect within the DT1 and DT2 zones. Upon review from the Planning Commission heard comment from the applicant requesting that the first floor height for residential product be reduced from a minimum of 10 feet to a minimum of 9 feet. The commission, after consideration, voted to forward a recommendation to the Municipal Council to reduce that 10-foot requirement to 9 feet within only the DT1 zone, and to keep that, or recommend a 10-foot first floor for residential as proposed by staff in the DT2 zones. Staff would still support a retaining that 10-foot first floor for residential in both zones, but we do want to know that the Planning Commission's recommendation to you was for a 9-foot residential first floor in the DT1 zone.
Do we have a map of those zones here? I think we've seen them before, the DT1, DT2 zones.
I don't have one in the slideshow, no.
Okay.
The DT1 zone essentially runs from about 500 north on University down to about... On
Center Street.
On 500 north on University down to about 300 south on University, and then Center Street to 2nd west and 2nd east and about 600 west, in kind of a strange cross shape surrounding those two streets.
And then DT2 extends slightly.
Is actually within that.
Oh,
so within. DT1 is the less intense zone, and DT2 is the more intense zone, encompassing part of the New Skin campus to the west of the City Center Temple, and then north of Center Street in the vicinity of the Wells Fargo and Zions Bank buildings, into some of the property the city owns in between Freedom and 100 West, current the former location R.C. Williams, some of those areas in that commercial or office core north of Center Street in between Freedom and University Avenue.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Questions for Mr. Yost? Mr. Winterton?
Yes, that 14-foot in commercial, does that open space, or could that include some ductwork, or what's involved in that 14 feet?
That's described as floor to ceiling, so that would be a finished ceiling height. In some instances, mechanical equipment may, or lighting or other types of features may intrude into that space, but generally, when a building is constructed, we would measure that space as a finished floor to a finished ceiling height. So that wouldn't be a structural height, that would be a clear floor to ceiling height.
Thank you, Mr. Yost. Oh, yes, Mr. Van Buren.
Just for some clarification, the resolution or the ordinance we have before us supports the staff's opinion of having 10 foot in both zones, right?
That is correct. That's how your resolution reads, yes.
Okay. And yeah, it would seem confusing to have 9 in one and 10 in the other, and maybe when the applicant speaks for a minute, he can give us a little insight to that. But the ordinance that we have here is 10 feet in both.
Correct.
For the residential.
Yes, the ordinance before
On
you
the first
reflects
floor.
that. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Santiago?
So the, taking out the story minimum, or this, I'm sorry, the stories, but just using the maximum height.
Correct.
What, in your wildest dreams, do you foresee being sort of the lowest height of a story and the greatest height of a story in that scenario? I mean, are we going to get odd types of floors? Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Without having any sort of story requirement.
Right.
It can be, I guess, any number of things, but what's
The
feasible?
minimum would be regulated by building code. I
Okay.
don't know what that specific height is, but I believe it's around 7 to 7.5 feet, perhaps even 8. I wish I knew that specifically. The applicant may be more familiar. But that minimum height is regulated by building code. The maximum height is regulated in the zone actually as 14 feet. So you couldn't have a upper floor taller than 14 feet, and we wouldn't anticipate in this zone that we would get that. Perhaps if, and that being a floor to ceiling height, even in a very intensive medical type of use like the hospital, which has a really very high floor to floor height, that their finished ceiling height would be any taller than that. And then in our first floor, we currently, even with this amendment, we don't allow a greater than a 20-foot first floor. So you can see a 20-foot first floor and 14-foot floors on top of that, and or a 14-foot first floor for commercial or 10-foot for residential, and then the building code minimum above that.
Okay, and so for loft spaces or those kinds of things, if they were going to be usable space, they'd still have to be, they'd be under this building code of 7.5.
Right, as far as a mezzanine space or those type of things, yes, that would be governed by building code.
Okay,
And if they're just partial floors, like in the 63 East project, there's a mezzanine towards the rear of the ground floor commercial space. For zoning purposes, we don't consider that a story. So they have a 20-foot first floor on that building with a mezzanine in the rear of the space.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Yost. The applicant for this project is a representative of Forge Development, Mr. Ryan Freeman. We invite you to speak at this time if you have anything to add and respond to any questions.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot to add that would be helpful other than our main reason for the request of the 9-foot first floor, as is kind of customary with all of our projects, is really aesthetic. As we've laid out both, we felt like that was a more appropriate layout, especially for that part of the community. It's just a little bit more quaint. It's a little more residential feel, and we just kind of felt like, especially with the porches and things that we're adding to the project, we felt it just had a better homey feel for that specific location. I don't know either on the specific floor heights, although I thought it was 12 to 14 feet was what in this zone what the floor heights were required, but I could be wrong.
Questions for Mr. Freeman? Mr. Freeman, while you're at the microphone, would you care to update us on 63 East?
I'd be happy to, yeah. So we, this project has been a symbol of determination. We've had a couple of things. The most latest slight setback was that our cabinets have been sitting on a boat on Long Beach. So we've got the upper floors basically completed. We just got the cabinets in actually a couple of days ago, and they're being installed. So we're really close. We're probably about 3 to 4 weeks from finishing the first upper floors. And then the remaining floors will come on about a week and a half after that, going down. We're still receiving tremendous response from the market. We're about 75% pre-leased right now, and we're kind of averaging 2 to 3 new reservations every week. So we're doing really well, and I think this can be a fabulous project for Provo.
Looking at fall move-in or before?
Yes, certainly before. It's either at the end of this month or the first week of the following month.
Mm-hmm. That's generated some questions.
Commercial below, how are you coming on the leasing of that?
We've had that pre-leased for a while, almost a year now, actually. It's a restaurant called Antebellum. It's the same gentleman that own the Chef's Table in Orem. They're fabulous restaurateurs. They're very, very good at what they do, and we're excited. It's a Southern comfort food type, a little bit higher end price point. Probably they were telling me $15 a plate for lunch and going up to $30 for dinner. But I had did a menu tasting a few months ago, and it's pretty amazing. The chicken fried steak is remarkable.
And the smallest unit you have is 450 square feet, is that correct?
That's right.
Have those sold, or
yes,
not sold, but leased?
Yes, all the studios are accounted for. I think we just have a handful of 2-bedroom, and I think 1 or 2 1-bedrooms remaining. The studios have been really popular. To that point, though, the one thing that's interesting is they're smaller, but yet people are still willing to step up and pay for, per square foot, about the same as what they're paying in downtown Salt Lake. So it's really exciting news for Provo, I think.
The quality of the design and what you're putting into it, the materials.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that really, the feedback we've received so far is the high ceilings have been really well received. We're putting high-end appliances and granite and just the amenities, I think people are really attracted to, and being able to go up on the top of the roof and overlook everything is pretty sweet.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you.
Sorry to derail the issue at hand.
I'm glad you asked.
It's great to get an update. I'll invite any other council discussion then at this time, questions or comments for Mr. Yost or others. Mr. Sewell.
I have a question for Mr. Yost. In the discussion about the 9-foot versus 10-foot, is there distinguishing features between these two zones that would justify, in your mind, that difference?
It's a difficult question to answer. I don't know that I could justify the difference based on exclusively difference between the zones. You may consider that the DT2 zone is the more intensive zone, allowing a greater overall height and anticipating a greater intensity of development, so that increased first floor height may be responsive to that. The recommendation from Planning Commission did have some discussion with basis in that, and also just as a way to make a change to accommodate the request, make the minimum change to the proposal to accommodate the request.
Thank you.
Ms. Santiago?
Just one last question. Having a 10-foot minimum on the base floor of other buildings that we want in the downtown, does that go along with our plan for downtown, or are we looking for more of a mixed use with commercial on the bottom, living on the top, or do you feel like that this creates any issues with other areas in these two zones?
I don't feel that that the specific height requirement creates an issue. We've identified the areas where we know that we must see commercial first floors, and as staff we feel that maintaining that floor height even in residential product off of those primary streets allows for the flexibility that has made our core downtown adaptable over the 100 to 140 years that we have some buildings still around. So we know where we need it now as far as commercial, and have required that, and feel that this 10-foot requirement allows the flexibility for change and adaptation over the years.
And you said it was mostly west of University that we have the 14-foot requirement on the bottom, and then east of University is where we're allowing the 10-foot residential on the bottom?
On University, from Center Street north to the edge of the DT1 zone requires a commercial ground floor. Okay. On Center Street, from 500 West to 100 East requires a commercial first floor. South of Center Street on University, to the end of the zone, and from 100 east to 200 east, from 500 west to 600 west, those areas require the space to be built to a commercial standard, but it is not required to be occupied by commercial uses. But we still require the same type of construction to allow those to transition. So this 14-foot requirement would apply anywhere there is commercial use at the first floor, and those areas where it is required, and then anywhere else where a commercial first floor is constructed.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Is there a motion? This item has also been noticed as a public hearing, so we would invite any members of the public who would care to speak to this item to approach the podium at this time. If not, we'll close the public hearing and bring the item back to the council for a motion or discussion. Mr. Miller?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I move to approve the ordinance amending sections 14.21A.070 and 1421B.070 of the Provo City Code to delete the maximum number of building stories allowed and to include a minimum first-story height requirement in the DT1 general downtown and DT2 downtown core zones.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Is there a second? Mr. Sewell, thank you. Those in favor? And that vote is unanimous. Thank you. I'll call for a motion to adjourn our council meeting. Moved by Ms. Santiago, and a second by Ms. Hales. Those in favor? The vote is unanimous. Thank you.